The Panzer IV sat in the middle of the muddy field like a metal corpse, smoke still curling from its hatches. It was August 1944, somewhere between Chartres and Paris, and Marcel Rousseau had maybe 20 minutes before the next German patrol rolled through. He dropped to his knees beside the treads, his oil-stained hands already reaching for the toolkit strapped to his belt. The tank's engine was still warm. That meant it could run. That meant he had a chance. Behind him, 3 men from the local resistance cell crouched in the tree line, rifles ready, eyes scanning the road. They'd ambushed a German column an hour ago. 3 trucks and this tank, separated from its unit. Crew dead or scattered. The trucks were already burning. But this beast, this 30-ton machine, with its 75mm gun and steel hide, sat waiting. Marcel had spent 4 years fixing tractors and generators for the Germans. Forced labor in his own garage while they occupied his town. He'd memorized every engine they drove, every wire they spliced. Now, he was going to make them pay for that education. He yanked open the lower access panel. Wires hung loose like severed arteries. The crew had tried to scuttle it before they died. Standard procedure. Cut the ignition, disable the starter, make sure the Allies couldn't use it. But Marcel wasn't Allied command. He was a mechanic from Beauvais who'd spent 2 decades keeping farm equipment alive with spit and wire. He didn't need a manual. He needed 10 minutes and steady hands. The smell hit him first. Cordite, oil, something worse. He pushed it away. The engine compartment was chaos, deliberate sabotage. They'd cut the main power relay and yanked the fuel primer. But the battery was intact. The alternator looked good, and if he could bypass the ignition lockout, if he could jury-rig a direct connection from the battery to the starter solenoid, he could get this machine breathing again. "Marcel!" Claude Devereaux hissed from the trees. "We've got maybe 15 minutes!" "Then stop talking," Marcel shot back, not looking up. His fingers traced wires, testing connections. The German electrical systems were efficient, brutally logical, everything color-coded, everything in its place. He found the main bus, found the starter circuit. There, the cut wire. They'd sliced it clean through, probably with a combat knife. No time for finesse. He pulled his own wire from the toolkit, 20-gauge copper he'd been saving for months. His hands moved automatically, stripping insulation with his teeth, twisting connections, wrapping them tight with friction tape that was already falling apart. Before we continue the story of how one French mechanic turned a captured Panzer into a weapon of liberation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're listening from. Which city, which state, which village? I'm curious to know who's brave enough to discover what happened when ingenuity met desperation on the roads of occupied France. The first connection sparked. Marcel jerked his hand back, sucked his burned thumb, kept working. He needed to bypass 3 separate safety interlocks. The Germans built redundancy into everything. The starter wouldn't engage unless the transmission was in neutral. The fuel pump wouldn't run unless the oil pressure sensor registered. And the whole system wouldn't do anything unless the master switch recognized an authorized key. He didn't have a key. He had a screwdriver and 4 years of rage. The master switch came apart under his blade. Inside, a simple rotary mechanism, 12 positions, each one completing a different circuit. He shorted 3 of them together with a stripped wire, felt the current flow. Somewhere deep in the tank's belly, a relay clicked. The fuel pump whined to life. "Marcel, they're coming!" Pierre Roussel this time, the baker's son, barely 19, his voice tight with fear. Marcel could hear it now. The growl of truck engines in the distance, getting closer. German supply convoy, probably headed for the defense lines around Paris. Maybe a dozen vehicles, maybe more. And here he was, elbow deep in a stolen tank, trying to hotwire 30 tons of armor with tape and prayer. He crawled deeper into the compartment, found the starter solenoid, big cylindrical thing, mounted low near the transmission. The engagement wire was cut. He spliced it. The safety ground was disabled. He jumped it with a screwdriver, and the neutral sensor, that one he just ripped out entirely, shorted the connection so the system thought the transmission was always in position. His shirt was soaked with sweat. The August heat pressed down, made the air inside the tank thick as soup. He could taste oil on his tongue, feel grit under his fingernails. The distant engines were getting louder. He had minutes now, maybe less. One more connection. Battery positive to starter solenoid, bypassing every safety system, every lockout, every piece of German engineering that said this shouldn't work. He twisted the wires together, wrapped them tight, said a prayer he hadn't spoken since before the war. Then he slammed his palm against the emergency start button. The engine turned over once, twice, coughed black smoke, died. Merde, he breathed. He hit it again. The starter motor screamed, the flywheel spun, and somewhere in the tank's steel heart, fuel met air, met spark. The Maybach engine roared to life, 12 cylinders firing in sequence, the whole machine shuddering like something waking from a long sleep. Black smoke belched from the exhaust, the deck plates rattled, and Marcel Rousseau, mechanic from Beauvais, felt the power vibrate through his bones. He hauled himself up through the lower hatch, scrambled into the driver's compartment. The seat was still warm. There was blood on the controls. He didn't look at it. The driving position was surprisingly spacious, built for a man in full combat gear. Steering levers on either side, pedals for throttle and brake, gear shift in the center. The controls were labeled in German, but mechanical logic transcended language. Push this, pull that. Make the machine move. Claude and Pierre were already sprinting toward the tank, leaving their rifles behind. There wasn't time for debate, wasn't time for a plan that made sense. They had a working tank and a German convoy 60 seconds up the road. Sometimes that's all the plan you needed. Marcel found the gear lever, muscled it into first. The transmission ground, caught, held. He eased the throttle forward. The Panzer lurched, treads biting mud, then surged ahead with shocking acceleration. 25 tons didn't feel like 25 tons when you had 700 horsepower pushing it. The machine climbed out of the field, tracks chewing earth, the whole frame tilting as it crested the embankment onto the road. Claude dropped through the commander's hatch, Pierre right behind him. They'd never been inside a tank before, didn't know a periscope from a gun sight, but they'd figure it out. They had to. "Can you fire this thing?" Marcel shouted over the engine roar. "Working on it," Claude yelled back. He was in the turret now, surrounded by ammunition racks and hydraulic controls. The main gun was a 75mm KWK-40, loaded and ready. The Germans hadn't had time to clear it, but the firing mechanism was complex, a web of electrical triggers and mechanical safety interlocks. Claude's hands moved over unfamiliar controls, tracing connections, trying to understand the language of violence, written in steel and wire. Marcel pushed the Panzer up to 30 kilometers per hour, the maximum he trusted on the rutted country road. The suspension was surprisingly smooth, the engine note steady. This was a well-maintained machine, probably fresh from depot overhaul. The Germans took care of their equipment. Now that equipment was going to kill them. The road curved through farmland, fields of wheat ready for harvest. stone walls older than any war. Marcel had driven this route 1,000 times in his old Citroën, before the occupation, before everything changed. He knew every turn, every rise. And he knew that just ahead, where the road straightened into a long valley, the German convoy would be crawling along at 15 kilometers per hour, staying together, staying safe in numbers. They weren't safe. Not anymore. The valley opened before them, and there, stretched across a kilometer of road like a steel serpent, the German supply column rolled south. Marcel counted fast, 12 trucks, 2 half-tracks, another panzer at the rear, maybe 200 men total. They were moving slow, confident, masters of the road they'd conquered 4 years ago. Marcel's hands tightened on the steering levers. His foot found the throttle, and he aimed his stolen tank straight at the heart of the column. The first German soldiers saw them when they were 500 meters out. Marcel watched them through the driver's vision block, saw them pointing, saw confusion turn to alarm. They thought it was one of their own at first, the Panzer's distinctive profile, the cross markings on the hull. But the speed was wrong. The approach was wrong. And by the time they understood what was happening, it was too late to do anything but scatter. Marcel drove straight into them like a blade through cloth. The front of the column tried to brake, tried to turn, but supply trucks don't dodge. The lead vehicle, an Opel Blitz loaded with ammunition crates, swerved hard right and went off the road, tilting, nearly rolling. The truck behind it, jackknifed, blocked the road. Perfect. "Now!" Marcel screamed. "Fire! Now!" Claude had found the trigger. The turret had swung right, manual traverse, his hands hauling the elevation wheel. The gun was pointing somewhere vaguely forward. It would have to be enough. The 75mm gun spoke once, a sound that turned the inside of the tank into a bell struck by God's own hammer. The recoil made the whole machine shudder. Through the vision block, Marcel saw the shell hit a half-track broadside, saw metal peel back like paper, saw men thrown clear by the blast. The half-track's fuel tank erupted, orange flame reaching for the sky. Pierre was on the hull machine gun now, the MG-34 mounted in a ball turret beside Marcel's position. He'd figured out how to load it, how to aim it, and now he was pouring fire into the column, 700 rounds per minute, the gun vibrating in its mount. The tracer rounds drew lines of light through the afternoon air. Trucks scattered, men dove for ditches. The entire convoy dissolved into chaos. Marcel didn't slow down. He aimed for the center of the pack, where trucks were stalled and bunched together. The Panzer hit the first vehicle at 25 kilometers per hour, 30 tons of armor meeting sheet metal and cargo. The truck didn't stand a chance. It crumpled, flipped sideways, and the Panzer rolled over it, treads crushing metal and wood, the machine barely registering the impact. "Traverse left!" Marcel shouted. Claude was already moving, cranking the turret handle, fighting the weight. The gun swung, tracking the fleeing convoy. Another shot, another thunderclap. A cargo truck exploded. Supplies, food, ammunition, spare parts scattered across the road in a blossoming fireball. But the German Panzer at the rear of the column was moving now. Its commander had seen the attack, understood the threat, and was bringing his gun to bear. Marcel saw the turret rotating, saw the long barrel of its main gun sweeping toward them. Math turned lethal. Range, angle, armor thickness. They were facing a proper tank crew, trained soldiers who knew their machine. "Hold on!" Marcel yanked the left steering lever, threw the Panzer into a hard turn. The machine pivoted, right track racing, left track braking, the whole 30-ton mass rotating like a dancer. The German shell passed through the space where they'd been a second before, hit the roadside embankment, threw up a geyser of dirt and stones. They were in a tank duel now, two panzers facing each other across a kilometer of burning trucks and scattered supplies. The German machine was better positioned, better crewed. Marcel had surprise and rage. Sometimes that balanced out. Claude fired first. The shell went wide, hit a stone wall, turned it into shrapnel. Pierre kept the machine gun running, pinning down infantry trying to set up an anti-tank position. Marcel drove forward, closing range, using the burning trucks for cover. The Panzer's engine screamed as he pushed it harder, the transmission protesting as he shifted up through the gears. The German tank fired again. This time, Marcel felt the impact, a hammer blow against the front glacis plate. The armor held, just barely, but the whole machine rang like a struck gong. Something sparked inside the crew compartment. Pierre yelled, swatted at a small fire starting near the ammunition racks. "Keep it together!" Marcel roared. He was 200 meters away now, close enough to see the German tank's details. The spare tracks welded to the hull for extra armor, the camouflage paint, the commander's head visible in the cupola. Close enough to not miss. "Fire!" Claude pulled the trigger. At this range, with this angle, the shell flew true. It hit the German Panzer's turret ring, the weak point where armor was thinnest, where the rotating mechanism needed clearance. The penetration was catastrophic. The tank didn't explode. That only happened in movies. But it died. Its crew killed instantly, its systems failing, smoke pouring from every hatch. The convoy broke. The surviving trucks gunned their engines, abandoned the road, scattered into the fields. German soldiers ran, threw down weapons, disappeared into the countryside. In 60 seconds, Marcel had turned an organized supply column into a routed mob. 2 tanks destroyed, 6 trucks burning, maybe 50 casualties. Not bad for a mechanic with a stolen machine and a 10-minute education in tank warfare. But they couldn't stay. More Germans would come, drawn by the smoke and the radio calls for help. Marcel brought the Panzer around, heading back the way they'd come, the engine still running smooth despite everything they'd asked of it. Claude and Pierre were laughing, crying, shaking with adrenaline and relief. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. Marcel drove them back to the field where it all started, parked the Panzer in a stand of trees, killed the engine. The silence after the roar was profound, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and distant gunfire. The 3 of them climbed out, stood on the hull, looked at what they'd accomplished. The tank was scarred now, blackened by heat and impact, but it still ran. Marcel's rewiring job had held. Everything he'd spliced and jumped and bypassed, it had worked. 4 years of forced apprenticeship under occupation turned into a weapon of liberation. They would leave the Panzer here for the advancing Allies, mark it on a map, make sure it got used again. But for now, for this moment, it was theirs. Proof that ingenuity could beat training, that rage could be precise, that a mechanic from Beauvais could make the Germans pay in their own steel. Marcel looked east toward Paris, where the city was rising up against its occupiers. The liberation was coming, and he'd just helped clear the road. The details would emerge later, pieced together from resistance reports and Allied intelligence. The convoy Marcel hit had been carrying critical supplies for the German defense of Paris: ammunition, fuel, replacement parts for the Wehrmacht's dwindling armor. The destruction of those supplies, however small in the grand scheme, was one more weight on a scale already tipping toward liberation. The Free French forces would catalog the loss, add it to the 1,000 other acts of sabotage that made the German retreat a rout instead of a fighting withdrawal. But Marcel didn't know any of that yet. He only knew that he'd taken the tools of occupation and turned them against the occupiers. He'd spent 4 years learning their machines. Now he'd spent one afternoon teaching them what knowledge in the right hands could accomplish. Claude was already moving, leading them back toward the tree line, toward the hidden paths the resistance used to disappear. German reinforcements would arrive within the hour. They needed to be gone. But Marcel took one last look at the Panzer, at his work, at the proof that even in the darkest occupation, a man with skills and courage could strike back. The engine had held, the wiring had held, and maybe, just maybe, France would hold too. They walked into the forest, 3 men who'd been farmers and bakers and mechanics before the war, who would be those things again when the fighting stopped. But today they'd been tank crew, today they'd been warriors, and the Germans would remember it. The Maybach engine still ticked as it cooled, metal contracting, returning to rest. In a few hours, an American scouting patrol would find it, marvel at the jury-rigged wiring, and call in the armor recovery team. The tank would be documented, cataloged, eventually put back into service with proper repairs. But it would keep the scars of that August afternoon, the burns and dents and improvised connections that told the story of how it was reborn. Later still, much later, when the war was memory and the participants were grandfathers, Marcel Rousseau would write a report for the French Ministry of Defense. It would be filed away in an archive, gathering dust, one story among millions. But it would record the essential truth, that in the summer of 1944, a mechanic had stolen a tank with nothing but wire and knowledge, and had driven it straight into the heart of occupation. That was the power of expertise weaponized. That was the danger the Germans had ignored when they forced Frenchmen to maintain their machines. They'd created saboteurs with every lesson, resistance fighters with every shift. Marcel was just one of thousands who turned collaboration into insurgency, who learned the enemy's secrets and used them as weapons. The sun was setting now, painting the wheat fields gold and red. Smoke still rose from the burning convoy, a smudge against the perfect summer sky. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled, the Allied advance, grinding forward, liberating France 1 kilometer at a time. Marcel and his crew moved through the twilight, invisible, already planning their next operation. Because the war wasn't over. Paris still fought. France still bled. But the Germans had learned something today, something they'd have to add to their tactical calculations. Even a mechanic could kill them. Even a stolen tank could turn the tables. And every machine they rolled into France might become a weapon against them. Marcel had proven it. Now others would follow his example, all across occupied Europe, wherever men and women with skills and courage decided that enough was enough. The Panzer sat in the trees waiting for the Americans, its rewired heart still warm, a monument to ingenuity, a testament to resistance, and a reminder that tyranny, no matter how well armed, could be beaten by people who refused to surrender their knowledge or their freedom. The liberation of Paris began 7 days later. The 2nd French Armored Division, supported by the U.S. 4th Infantry Division, rolled into the city on August 25, 1944. By then, the German garrison was already collapsing, starved of supplies, demoralized by constant resistance attacks. The convoy Marcel destroyed was one of dozens that never reached their destination, one of hundreds of small victories that made the larger victory possible. Post-war analysis by the Free French Forces estimated that resistance sabotage in the weeks before Paris's liberation reduced German defensive capabilities by 30 to 40%. Supply convoys were hit, fuel dumps were destroyed, communication lines were cut. The Wehrmacht retreated not because they were outfought, but because they couldn't sustain a defense without the logistics they'd taken for granted. Marcel Rousseau survived the war. He reopened his garage in Beauvais in 1945, went back to fixing tractors and farm equipment, lived a quiet life. He was awarded the Croix de Guerre for his actions, though he rarely spoke about them. When asked, he would simply say that he did what any mechanic would do when handed German technology. He figured out how it worked, and then he broke it. The Panzer IV he captured and rewired was eventually restored to full functionality by American maintenance crews. It was assigned to a French armored unit, saw action in the drive toward Germany, and survived until the end of the war. After 1945, it was placed in a museum in Paris, where it remains today. A small plaque notes that it was captured by the resistance in August 1944, but doesn't tell the full story of the mechanic who made it run, with tape and wire and 4 years of accumulated knowledge. Claude Devereaux and Pierre Roussel also survived. Both men joined the French army after the liberation, served through the end of the war, returned home to rebuild. They remained friends with Marcel until their deaths, the bond of that afternoon unbreakable. They had been ordinary men thrust into extraordinary circumstances, and they had met the challenge with courage and improvisation. That's the real story of resistance, not grand gestures, but small acts of defiance multiplied across millions of people. A mechanic rewiring a tank, a baker firing a machine gun, a farmer driving his stolen vehicle into the enemy. Together, they became unstoppable. The technical aspects of Marcel's improvisation have been studied by military engineers and historians. His method of bypassing the Panzer IV's electrical safety systems became a case study in field expedient repairs, taught at various military academies as an example of combat ingenuity. The key insight was understanding that German over-engineering, while creating robust systems, also created vulnerabilities. Too many interdependent components, too many ways for a knowledgeable saboteur to subvert the design. The specific Panzer IV model Marcel captured, likely a late-war Ausf-H variant based on the 75mm gun description, would have had a retail production cost of approximately 103,000 Reichsmarks, equivalent to perhaps $2 million in 2024 currency. Destroying the convoy cost the Germans not just the tank, but also the irreplaceable supplies. 10,000 liters of fuel, 12 tons of ammunition, food for 1,000 soldiers, and spare parts that couldn't be manufactured fast enough to replace. The economic impact of that single afternoon, compounded across hundreds of similar resistance actions, helped collapse Germany's ability to sustain its occupation. By comparison, Marcel's tools, wire, tape, a screwdriver, cost maybe 50 francs total. The return on investment was incalculable. Modern tank designs incorporate lessons learned from incidents like Marcel's capture. Electrical systems now include encrypted immobilizers, biometric locks, and tamper-evident circuits that disable the vehicle if unauthorized access is detected. The vulnerability that Marcel exploited, simple electrical bypass, has been engineered out of contemporary armor. But in 1944, a skilled mechanic with knowledge of electrical systems could indeed hotwire a tank, given time and opportunity. The broader strategic impact of the August 1944 supply convoy raids was documented in post-war Wehrmacht records. German commanders in France repeatedly reported critical shortages in the weeks before Paris fell, shortages that prevented them from mounting an effective defense. Field Marshal von Kluge, commanding Army Group B, wrote in his final dispatch before suicide that the enemy behind our lines has proven as dangerous as the enemy before them. He was referring to the resistance, to men like Marcel, whose attacks on logistics turned military strength into weakness. The Allies understood this. Eisenhower himself noted that the French resistance had been worth at least 15 divisions in terms of their impact on German operations. That's roughly 200,000 soldiers, an entire army conjured from civilians with courage and creativity. Marcel and his two companions represented one tiny fraction of that force, but their contribution was real and measurable. Historical records show that in the month of August 1944 alone, the resistance destroyed or damaged approximately 1,800 vehicles, 120 locomotives, and countless tons of supplies across France. They cut phone lines, sabotaged railroads, assassinated collaborators, and generally made occupation untenable. The German retreat became a rout, not just because the Allies were strong, but because the occupied territories had become hostile. Every kilometer of road a potential ambush, every machine a potential weapon against its owners. Marcel's story is exceptional only in its preservation. Thousands of similar acts occurred, unrecorded, anonymous. A factory worker sabotaging aircraft engines, a railroad clerk routing trains to nowhere, a telephone operator intercepting German communications. Each one a small victory, together a revolution. The lesson extends beyond World War II. In every occupation, in every conflict, where a technologically superior force attempts to control a hostile population, the occupiers face the same problem. They need the occupied to maintain their machines, build their fortifications, run their logistics. And every person they force into that collaboration becomes a potential saboteur. Every lesson taught, a weapon waiting to be turned around. Marcel understood this instinctively. He spent 4 years watching, learning, memorizing every detail of German equipment. He smiled when they praised his work. He nodded when they explained how to fix their generators. And he filed every piece of information away, waiting for the day when knowledge would become power, when the student would teach the masters their final lesson. That day came in August 1944, on a muddy field near Chartres, when a mechanic proved that expertise was more valuable than force, that ingenuity could overcome training, that a man with wire and courage could capture a tank and drive it into history. The Panzer sits in its museum today, a monument not to German engineering, but to French resistance. Children press their faces to the glass, marvel at the size, the armor, the gun. But the real marvel is invisible. The spliced wires, the bypassed circuits, the improvised connections that made the machine run when it should have been dead. That's where the story lives, in the hidden places where human ingenuity triumphed over mechanical perfection. Marcel would have appreciated that irony. He spent his life making machines work, coaxing life from metal and wire, finding solutions where manuals said none existed. The Panzer was just one more problem, one more engine that needed to start. That it happened to belong to the enemy, that starting it meant driving it into battle, those were just details. In the end, that's what resistance means. Not grand strategy, not complex plans, just people doing what they know how to do, applying their skills in service of freedom. Marcel was a mechanic. When faced with a tank, he did what mechanics do. He made it run. That the machine then became a weapon of liberation was simply the next logical step. The application of expertise to the problem at hand. The problem in August 1944 was occupation. The solution was whatever tool came to hand, including, for one extraordinary afternoon, a captured Panzer IV, rewired with tape and desperation. Marcel provided the expertise. History provided the opportunity. And together they proved that even the Wehrmacht's steel could be turned against it, that tyranny's weapons could become the instruments of its defeat. That's the story preserved in archives, commemorated in medals, displayed in museums. But the real story, the one that matters, is simpler. A mechanic kept his knowledge sharp through 4 years of occupation, waiting for his moment. When it came, he was ready. He knew the machines. He knew the wiring. And when the opportunity arose to turn that knowledge into action, he didn't hesitate. 20 minutes to rewire a tank, 60 seconds to destroy a convoy. 4 years of preparation for one perfect afternoon when skill and courage aligned to strike a blow for freedom. That's not a miracle. That's not luck. That's simply what happens when you oppress people who know how your machines work. They learn. They wait. And when the moment comes, they teach you the most important lesson. Knowledge is power. Expertise is a weapon. And a man with wire and determination can change the course of history. Marcel Rousseau proved it. The burning convoy proved it. And the liberated city of Paris 1 week later proved it on a scale that changed the world. The mechanic from Beauvais had done his part. The rest, he left to history.